Hi. Okay. Hi, I'm Abby. I introduced Martha last night, so I've been talking in front of you before. But thanks for having me on this panel. And this is really interesting for me because I think I'm the only person that works at an actual nonprofit, right, on this panel? No? Oh, you guys are nonprofit? Oh, sorry. I messed that up. Good. But I just think it's really interesting because, like, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I was doing before I started at ThreeWalls and how that kind of informs my work now. And it's so interesting to me because when I started, I was like totally anti doing any institutional form for the work that I was doing. And now working in a nonprofit, I sort of have to answer a whole bunch of different kinds of questions in terms of like public and being, being part of a Chicago community and what that means. So it's interesting, for me to see that transition in my work. But so I live in Chicago. Before I started working at ThreeWalls, I founded an artist-run space and kind of collective called Incubate. And Incubate was a whole bunch of things, but I think it was a lot about creating a series of experiments around the idea of sustainability and sustainability for nonprofit spaces and kind of questioning the logic of what we were in school. We were graduate students in art administration and having a lot of conversation amongst ourselves about like how we were going to work in nonprofits and what our role was going to be and what kind of actors we were going to be in the system, and sort of feeling like that there was a particular logic that was being taught to us about growth and longevity, and and that we sort of were like, well, let's take time to sort of experiment with that, and what does that mean? And also feeling like when you're in school, it's really hard to connect to a local context. And Chicago is super fascinating for a really strong history of political and socially engaged art. And we really wanted to directly connect with those people. And so it felt like creating a space outside of school was the way that we could do that. So we founded this space. This is what it looked like. And we did a series of things there, so every month, so as I said, we were this collective, we didn't have any fundraising mechanisms, and so we started a residency program so that we can invite artists to come in and live in the basement for 1 to 3 months and make work, and they paid a nominal amount of rent, and Roman, one of the members, lived there, and then we shared space to raise the rent with Area Chicago, which is a magazine on art and cultural politics, and Chicago Underground Library. And so this is, in this picture you can see to the left, that's some example of one of the last residents that we had there. His name is Chris, and I'm totally blanking on his last name, but he was part of Elsewhere for a long time. I know there's a bunch of people from Elsewhere here. And he was traveling around the country doing research about artist-run spaces and their history and collecting ephemera, and he came to Chicago and did a presentation about that. So it was an interesting artist space for us because it was definitely not like a traditional studio residency program, but there was a lot of activity happening in the space, and we felt like that kind of overlapping activity would be really interesting for someone coming from elsewhere to an urban center to try and connect with community. This is another picture of a residency. These two artists, Josh Ippel and Charlie Roderick, Hideous Beast, did this movie festival. So we had this space and we were running it and we were sort of thinking about how to work with artists. None of us had ever been to a residency program before. We had never, experienced one. We just sort of created a website and said, we have this residency program, please apply. And people did. And I think it's a lot like what Josh was talking about before, about just sort of like, we just decided that we wanted to create a community around the ideas that we were interested in. And we knew that we weren't the first people that had ever decided to do that, but it was also new to us. And that was like the most exciting thing. We just felt like it was the most important thing in the world, which I think is a really important, sort of stage and development. But anyway, so alongside having the residency program, we also curated shows across the country where we were working with different artists who were working through the idea of how they were building infrastructure for their work. All of this stuff was sort of thinking through alternative fundraising mechanisms, the economies that are supporting artists, artists that are working outside of sort of traditional institutions or markets that are trying to figure out how to sustain their work. Sort of a lot of stuff that socially engaged artists are dealing with, but kind of just exploring all that territory about the life of an artist. So we traveled to these different cities and we would curate exhibitions with local artists and artists from the previous exhibition. So it was like sort of a snowballing research project. And it ended at I-Beam in New York because some of the residents there were in the exhibition. So this is one example. This is Material Exchange. They built this pinball machine that we would move around, and basically you would pay to play, and then every dollar was supposed to pay back the labor that they made. And they used surplus materials to build the pinball machine. It was analog, and you had to have more than one person to play with it. This is it in Grand Rapids. So we were kind of like thinking through all these ideas, and artists were sort of like, okay, well, you know, you're talking about the life of an artist, but we actually need money. What does that look like? How are we going to do that? So what we decided to do was start a micro grant called Sunday Soup. And what that was that we would invite people over to our space, and we would cook a meal, and then take proposals for creative projects up until the day of the meal, and everybody that came got one vote and who got the grant. So we would all look at the grant proposals together, and then we would all collectively vote. And this was supposed to support artist projects that we felt like were falling outside the cracks, and it was also an attempt to articulate what it was that we wanted to give a platform to artists so they could articulate the value of their own work. And that as a community, we could come together and debate whether that thing deserved funding or you know, not only the competition of the thing, but also how we could collaborate on each other's practices. So this was our space. As you can see, we only had space for about 40 people to sit there. And so we gave away very small amounts of money. So this is us giving away our first check for $218. It took us like 6 months to raise that amount. Because the first 6 months of this project, nobody showed up. And then after we did it for like a long time, then people started coming. And then, so we started staging this project elsewhere. This is us doing it at Creative Times Democracy in America show. Anne Elizabeth Moore is giving a talk about a project that we funded, which was her going to Cambodia and creating zines with young women in a dormitory there. We obviously funded only a very small part of that project, but we were part of the funding of that. So we were very interested in having people come back and talk about their work, though it was a very easy funding mechanism. Like, it wasn't about reporting or anything. It was just sort of seed funds for things. That's us doing it in Buffalo. And so after doing it for a while, so we were traveling around, we had this residency program. Sorry, I'm talking really fast. We decided that we should, and so all these people started doing it in their own cities. And I think that was something that was really exciting to us, and it was organic, and it was not something that we really planned on, but we kind of hoped for. And I think that the project had a specific kind of formula that other people felt permission to take it on and to do it themselves, and to not, and it wasn't authored by us, and it was sort of really, you know, everybody operates autonomously. And so now there's about 65 of them. I don't know, it's like a little hard to gauge, but there's tons of them. Operating across the country, and there's a lot of people here that run them. And this is kind of how, and I'm bringing this up too because the work that I do now in terms of phone book and the first hand in glove, a lot of the research that we started with was connecting with these organizers in these different cities via these connections that we had already made, because all these people are sort of creating micro fundraising models in their own contexts. And adapting it. So we would sort of go to those organizers and say, you know, what's going on in your town? What do you think should be in the phone book? And that was kind of how the research process happened for the phone book. So this is Philly Steak in Philadelphia, and they are nomadic, and they have tons and tons of people go to this thing, and it's beautiful. This is Providence Provisions. Joy took this picture. She's in the audience. And we came up with this guide that I have like a box at home, and I always forget, I always forget to bring copies when I go places, but if you want a copy, I'll send you something in the mail. So we collaborate with the other groups in the network, and we try and create resources. We got together and did a big fundraising meal at Creative Times Living as Form Show, where we fundraised specifically for new soup projects that might want to start. And so we showed videos, and then everybody got one vote. And we raised money for a new soup project in Cairo, and then a second one for one in Grand Rapids. So that was kind of the organizing work that I was doing, and then I started working at ThreeWalls. And I'll talk briefly about ThreeWalls. How much time do I have? 1 minute? Oh, shit. Okay, no, it's fine. This is the one thing I wanted to talk about at ThreeWalls. So we do exhibitions, residency programs. We give out the Propeller Fund, which is a regional regranting project for public and collaborative projects. So this is something that is an issue that I'm working through in terms of sustainability that I think a lot of other groups are dealing with in Pelican Bomb and Springboard for the Arts. So we have this program called Community Supported Art, and we commission artists to make multiples. And then we sell those multiples as an affordable package, sort of like CSA agriculture. And I adopted this project from Springboard for the Arts, which started it but we do it differently in our city, in which it costs more money and we curate all the artists. And the idea is that we curate a spectrum of emerging to established artists, and then there's sort of, people know that they're buying into artists that have a reputation, they trust ThreeWalls, we sort of have a relationship with our community. But I do think that it's sort of like, and I also felt like really that I could adapt this model freely because of the work that I had already been doing with Sunday Soup. So it's kind of like those sort of, that like networked adaptability I'm really interested in. But I also think that we're struggling with this project too, because we're going into our 4th iteration. And as Martha talked about last night in the keynote, when we talk about sort of public-private sort of models and, we're starting this new project, we're now like, basically I act like a commercial dealer for this one particular thing. So I'm like struggling to speak in these different languages because the CSA, edition project needs to sell. Like, it actually has to have a functional capacity, for our organization, for ThreeWalls, because we are, a mid-sized nonprofit, and this was how I started working at ThreeWalls. I came up with this project, and it brought it to them, and me and Shannon adapted it, and it paid for my salary. So it like really, has a tangible issue in our place, and I just think it's a really interesting thing, because I see a lot of artist spaces sort of thinking through this idea about like how to come up with new streams of revenue so that they can support themselves, but also then you have to be competitive in a really different way. You have to sort of get out of your nonprofit hat and sort of speak in a different language. So it feels like that is one of the struggles that I like feel is facing, nonprofits that are working through, we do all the other traditional stuff, like we get grants, and we have, foundation support, and we have a big gala and all this kind of stuff. So is that it? That's my time. Okay. These are some artists that were in it. And then we did this really cool event at the Rebuilding Exchange, and then I did this show. Okay. Sorry. Thank you.